Howdy goons, and welcome to my Game & Watch retrospectives. I'm playing and reviewing every single Game & Watch game I possibly can, and then sharing the history and stuff with you. This video is the Silver Series collection. It consists of the first 5 games and watches to come out. They're named this because of their silver bodies. Among these are classics, and they're probably the most basic when it comes to game design and gameplay. Each of these is their own separate video, and are put together in this big version for people who want to watch the longer stuff. If you enjoy, make sure to subscribe because I'm doing the Gold Series next, and that one will be big only video, because there are 3 of them, so there's no point in doing 3 separate videos for that. Howdy goons, some of you know that I'm an ancient timeless being from beyond the stars, who only takes this cute form to protect your sanity. But these games are so old that even I don't have much of an interest in them, but I thought it'd still be fun to explore the history of Nintendo's oldest gaming handhelds, the Game & Watch. Despite these being the foundation of Nintendo's gaming empire, they haven't been preserved all that well. Out of 60 titles with 14 million units sold, only 32 were given a re-release outside of their individual handhelds. More can be played through emulation, but I don't think all of them were preserved that way. It makes sense why Nintendo couldn't or wouldn't remake or release all of these on a different system. Some of these were tie-ins with other companies like Disney and Peanuts, so it'd probably be a pain to get the licenses for these. Also, these are so old that most people don't really have an interest in playing them. See, Game & Watch games aren't like most retro games. Old games like the original Zelda still play like a modern game. It has action, adventure, you get to fight monsters, swing a sword, and solve puzzles, and save the princess. The game can even be saved so you can pick up where you left off. Game & Watch, for those of you who don't know, is a series of LCD games where each handheld held one game only. It could only hold that one specific game, because of the limitations of using the LCD screen. Rather than having constantly moving graphics, like even some of the oldest retro games, Game & Watch has a preset series of movements and positions and will illuminate the pieces based on what's active. A game like Zelda would never work as a Game & Watch game because of the limitations. I say that, but they did make a handheld designed after the Game & Watch that has the original Zelda on it, but that one uses a real screen. Game & Watch essentially used a digital watch or calculator screen for the game, and because of this limitation, they were all high-score battle games. The most variation you might get in one of these games is a mode switch that changes the difficulty or scoring method. These are games you might find fun for the first hour, or only play when you're pooping. But as I've said, just because they're old, and not really on the same level as video games, doesn't mean they shouldn't be archived or immortalized. Nintendo thought it was important enough to at least try, and they gave us Mr. Game & Watch, so they clearly have some form of fondness for the Game & Watch series. So I'm going to show you Game & Watch games in this series, and show you how they worked, review them, and tell you how you can play each specific one, if it's possible at all. Don't worry, it won't be all black and white and beeps and boops. Most of these got remakes in the Game & Watch Gallery series, featuring full color, and even Mario characters in place of Mr. Game & Watch. The first Game & Watch game is Ball, or Toss-Up as it's called in the US. Even back then we were localizing things that really didn't need to be localized. Like the majority of Game & Watch games, this unit sold less than 250,000 units, which sounds bad, but this was in 1980. The only other games people were playing were on the Atari, and at this point in Atari's history, people were starting to get a little tired of the slew of garbage being released on the consoles. This was still 2 years before ET, but the only way to play video games then was to go to the arcade, which meant having to leave home, or by buying an expensive console and games. An Atari 2600 was $200, which was like buying 2.5 Switch 2 consoles. Yes, it was that expensive. $1,100 and now money. Then the games were an additional $40. A single Game & Watch game was 6,000 yen, which was about $50 in now money. So you could get a new Game & Watch game for the same price as an Atari 2600 game, and they had better quality control, you didn't need to hook it up to your TV, and you didn't need to sit 3 feet from the TV to play. A dad could have a bowl of pretzels, a beer, and watch the game on TV while having a ball of his own. The Atari, of course, was much more popular, but I don't doubt that there were some people out there who thought that the Game & Watch was a better deal. Anyway, this is the Game & Watch box, at least for the Silver series. I love the packaging for these, it's so cool and cute and simple. The packaging is honest and it tells me exactly what the game is going to be like. Atari had a tendency to lie, or at least exaggerate with their box art. They often used highly detailed paintings to depict what the games would be like to someone with a very active near delusional level of imagination. Like if you look at these pixels and then you see this painting, you might need to get some help. GW boxes are simple and honest. They were black, white, gray, had a single picture of the gameplay on the front, and then a single color to complement the game. Ball was red. This black packaging with a bright red accent is eye-catching. It's retro, but modern, like what they thought the future might look like back then. When reading the back of the modern reproduction from 2010, Nintendo confirms that they thought of this as being futuristic. You are holding holding in your hands the game of the future. At least that's what we called it 30 years ago. Ball, the first installment in the Game & Watch series, has been faithfully reproduced and reissued so that gamers of the future can relive the groundbreaking technology of the past. This is our gift to you, Club Nintendo members. Enjoy. The original keeps the back just as simple, showing how to replace the batteries in a simple description. The new microcomputer Game & Watch is a full-fledged digital quartz watch that offers 2 fantastic games. Microcomputer is of course a bit generous. This was before the adoption of terms like game console and handheld. Also, saying this had 2 games was also a bit generous, but I'll get into that in a second. Let's finally talk about what you're here for. The game. This is Ball. You have 5 buttons: left, right, game A, game B, and time display. Left and right cycles the left and right hands in the various allowable positions, moving both simultaneously to the left or right depending on where you move them. Then the game buttons change the game modes between game A and game B. Time just showed the clock. The watch idea actually came out really close to the release, and I think they added it more just because they could. It's like they were trying to pack in as many features as they could. How you play Ball depends on the game mode, but basically you just juggle the balls. The balls go up, then you have to move the hand to where it'll land, and then when it hits the hand, it'll automatically go back up. If it doesn't land in a hand, you miss, and if you miss even once, you lose, and have to start over from the beginning. In game A, you have to juggle 2 balls and get a point for each ball tossed up. In B, you juggle 3, and for each ball caught, you get 10 additional points. The difficulty of this game is going to come from the same difficulty you get with all Game & Watch games. Since the character and balls don't move more than a few frames a second, you can't even really call these frames, but because they aren't actually animated, it can be hard to judge when things are going to land. There'll be many occasions where both balls appear to be in the same position and look like they're going to land at the same time. So you go to catch one, but miss the other. It can be very frustrating, which is why I like the Game Boy remake so much. These run at 60 FPS, so you can see which is going to fall first most of the time, and they can be more generous in the timing by some of these games extending the timing window to collect things. Ball is unfortunately one of the few Game & Watch games that didn't receive a remake, so in order to play it, you'll need to buy the reproduction handheld from Nintendo that came out 15 years ago on secondhand stores like eBay. These are still plentiful and cheap. You can even find the originals on Japanese auction sites for close to their original price, just, 50 to 60 bucks. But there wasn't a video game re-release outside of the cameos in games like Game Boy Camera or its release on the DSiWare. So the only practical way you'll be able to play this is through MAME emulation and finding compatible ROMs. Now, I'm not someone who hates emulation. I prefer it actually because of sites like Retro Achievements making them better. But this is one of the rare cases where emulation just doesn't do a good job of faithfully recreating the experience. I don't know why they didn't remake it, but this was part of the Silver Series, or the first series of GW games, so I have a pretty good idea why these weren't remade. These were originally made by Gunpei Yokoi while he was on the train watching someone play with a calculator. I can imagine him now watching someone type 80085 into the calculator and giggling. I love Mr. Yokoi though. He made my favorite video game system, the Wonder Swan. Anyway, Mr. Yokoi made this concept up for Ball and brought the idea up to Nintendo, and they said, sure, if you can come up with 3 more games. He struggled to think of just Ball alone, but he agreed anyway. Yokoi thought it was a pretty novel idea. He said it was a novel application of old technology, making the old new again. Later on in the future, Ball was received pretty negatively from some outlets like Nintendo Life calling it primitive or unsophisticated compared to games near the end of the Game & Watch's series. I'm guessing Nintendo agreed and thought Ball wasn't worth giving a second life. This was just the first iteration of the idea, so they weren't really sure of how they could push this idea. It's a creative idea, but they made better later, which I 100% agree with. Out of the 30 or so Game & Watch games that I played, this is probably one of the least engaging ones. It can be played 100% on autopilot. Your eyes will glaze over as you're pressing left and right. The only difficulty change is speed and an extra ball, but the games are already short. Most of my plays of Ball lasted less than 5 minutes, and I was done. But of course, I dropped this one faster because I didn't have it portable like Game Boy games or the original. But if I had an original or a reproduction, I think I'd like it more. I think the appeal of the Game & Watch isn't in one game, but instead a collection of them. Picking them up and playing them, swapping handhelds when I get bored of one. I can imagine myself having a little basket of these little suckers sitting right next to me, and I just dig around and pull out whichever one is closest. Yokoi was ahead of his time, despite this one being one of the less positively received games in modern times. While everyone at Nintendo was pushing hard for newer, more expensive hardware, he suggested using some slightly outdated stuff and cheaper button batteries. This is in part why it was so cheap to produce. Old LCD screens, small cheap batteries, very few buttons, and a small thin slate-style device. It wasn't advanced. It was hard hardly practical, a new application of old tech, which is exactly what he was shooting for after seeing that person playing with a calculator. Mr. Yokoi later on used a similar idea for making the Wonder Swan shortly before his death. It was a system that came late, used old hardware, but was great in spite of that because of its amazing library. A great reminder to modern gamers that power doesn't always mean the system is good. It's about the games that it has. Mr. Yokoi was simply built different, and I'm starting to think that we won't ever see another designer like him in your lifetime. I'll live forever, so I might see another Gunpei Yokoi in my lifetime. But we really do need a new one now. People are struggling, and games are expensive, and looking like a luxury for only the most well-off of gamers. We really need someone to come along and make a cheap system with good games. I would sell my second spine for a new $100 portable gaming system. Before I give a score, I think you should try at least one Game & Watch game in your life, but this isn't the one. This one is the first, but with how difficult it is to get one that gives you an authentic experience, I'd say it's entirely skippable, unless you really like the novelty of it or just want it as a, piece that you can show off. When I think Game & Watch, I think of Ball, but when I think of a good Game & Watch game, I think of Egg or Greenhouse. Compared to those, Ball is pretty far behind. What I'm trying to say is, Ball is the first Game & Watch, and it definitely plays like it's the first one. I can't see myself playing this one ever again unless I somehow got a physical one. It's clear Nintendo doesn't want us to have this one either, as it wasn't remade into a collection, and when it was remade, it was only offered through Club Nintendo or the DSi shop, which is now shut down. If they were really proud of this one, they would have made it more available like they did with Game & Watch Gallery 3 on Switch Online. Before I get into our next game, Flagman, let's talk a little bit more about the history. I didn't want to front load all the history into the first video, so specifically I want to talk about the build quality and game quality. Game & Watch wasn't the first portable game to hit the market. It might not have even been the first LCD game to market. In the Ball video, I mentioned how Nintendo talked about Ball and Game & Watch like they invented the wheel. In actuality, it was more like they refined it and smoothed it out. GW games were definitely different from what was available, and it wasn't like anything else on the market, even for a decade after its release. GWs, as you've seen, have a very serious design to them. They don't try to look like a children's toy because they weren't made for little kids. These were made for people of all ages to play during their commute, waiting for buses to show up, hopping on trains, or just time to kill between classes and stuff like that. Or just, toilet games. These definitely reek of toilet games. And if they've been used in the toilet games for too long, they might reek of toilet. These were serious devices for serious people who had some short windows of downtime from riding the train. Everything about the design is solid, simple, clean, and durable. Like many other older Nintendo products, these were built different and built to last, but they were still very thin. They have a simple rectangular design, silver finish, with a splash of color from buttons in its frame, plain text, and serious design. Despite being a toy, they didn't look like it. Interestingly, they even stuck to this build quality when bringing them to the US. I've mentioned how these were all localized and how Ball was changed into Toss-Up in the US. That's because Nintendo really didn't have a place in the American market yet, so they released their Game & Watches through Mego, who named the devices Timeout Games. If the design looking like a prison for video games wasn't kid repellent, then calling it a timeout certainly was. I'm guessing Nintendo still manufactured the games and just sent them over blank to Mego for localization and branding. The build quality and design is just perfect for me though. I can see myself carrying one of these around instead of my Retroid Pocket 3 Plus or my Switch 2. Game & Watch are actually portable, unlike these. Anyway, Nintendo continued to stand out with this design well until they ended the series after many iterations and changes like multiplayer versions or mini arcade cabinets. The cheapness we associate with these handhelds didn't really kick in until Tiger Electronics hit the scene. Those were the dark times, and are better left to a video of their own. If I can ever find one, these hunks of garbage used to be everywhere, and now I can't find even one at a yard sale anymore. Game & Watch Flagman. Flagman is the next Game & Watch game. It came out shortly after Ball and came in an orange box. With how simple it is, you'll wonder why it didn't release the same day as Ball. In Flagman, or Flag Space Man, in the needlessly localized American version, you watch the Flagman and repeat his commands back at him. Not to be confused with the hit horror character Bagman. In Game A, this is done through mimicking his actions back at him, and in B, you try to press the corresponding buttons as fast as possible. So despite this using the exact same resources, you have two very different games. You have a memory game similar to Simon, which came out 2 years prior, and a reaction-based game. They both have the same loss conditions though. All you have to do is just fail to press the buttons in time and you lose. So if you look away for even a second, you're screwed. And this one gets fast. At least you have 3 chances to fail though. In the physical version, you have 7 buttons: 1, 2, 3, 4, Game A, Game B, Time, and I didn't mention this last time, but ACL. It resets the data like time and scores. The number buttons, of course, correspond to the number displayed by the Flagman. He shows you the number on either a flag or on the bottom of his grippers. I can't believe that he's showing us his dogs for free like this. Filthy. This feels weirdly fetishy in 2025. I guess they didn't really have the foresight they thought they did. Maybe I've just been on the internet for a little too long. In Game A, he'll show you these in a pattern, and when you get it right, he repeats the pattern and adds an additional number. Despite me being pretty bad at remembering number sequences beyond 12, I found myself getting to 20 pretty easily. Maybe it's the repetition. In Game B, he shows you one number, then you have to press the same number as quick as possible. I don't think there is much of a challenge to these games except for remembering what button is what. Number 1, top left. Number 2, top right. 3, bottom left, and 4, bottom right. It's easy on the original because the locations on screen correspond with the location of the buttons and they're clearly labeled. I think Simon is better though because the indicators are built into the buttons, making it require no translation at all from your brain. But this incredibly simple game got a re-release on Game & Watch Gallery 3 for the GBC and was put on Switch Online. Was anyone really specifically wanting Flagman? Because I definitely bought a $500 gaming handheld just to play a less colorful Simon. In GW Gallery 3, or GWG 3 as the pros call it, you unlock Flagman by unlocking 10 stars and talking to Princess Peach in the gallery. Stars are unlocked by getting high scores in the games that you have unlocked. For every 200 points, you get 1 additional star with a maximum of 1,000 points. Thankfully, GWG 3 has remake versions of some of these games as well as the classic versions, and they're very easy to get high scores in if you can avoid falling asleep. They also have an easy and hard mode for each game. This means you can earn up to 100 stars on just the first 5 games, so you should be able to unlock the coveted Flagman pretty easily. Wow, this accidentally turned into a review of GWG 3. The remakes in GWG are pretty fun though, so you should try them. Unfortunately, Flagman isn't a remake, it's just a port or a reproduction of the original. The real problem comes from translating the game's actions to the inputs on your device. Up is 1, down is 3, A is 2, and B is 4. This is fine, and it works fine, but I think when emulating it on Switch Online, we could have had a better control scheme. After all, the bumpers and triggers are arranged in the same way as the physical version's buttons. LB could be 1, RB 2, LT 3, RT 4. It's still not perfect, but without remaking the game to accommodate the modern controls, this is the best we could get. There are other ways to play Flagman, of course, but they didn't do a reproduction like Ball, so getting an original Flagman is absurdly expensive, from the hundreds to the thousands, despite how mid this game is. Personally, I think the original $50 was already too high of an asking price. You can get Simon keychains for 15 bucks and it's the same thing. I checked Japanese sites and even they charge high prices for Flagman. Emulation is of course an option. You can get a ROM for MAME and then map the controls how you like, but I also found someone on itch who makes 3D handhelds that can be played in your browser. If you don't feel like messing around with emulation or buying Switch Online, you can try Flagman and many other LCD games on Idaso's itch page, RetroFab. They even have Sonic Speedway, which is my favorite, but it was a McDonald's toy. A little harder to get. I should probably look into finding one. Great, now I'll have to talk about those one day too. Anyway, the best way to play this game is unfortunately the original. You're going to react faster when there's less translation in the buttons. You could play the other versions and get good with enough practice, but you're not missing out. In my opinion, this is probably the worst Game & Watch toy ever. Not only is it highly derivative and incredibly basic, it was all that 45 years ago. It was born ancient. Benjamin Button disease, but for a video game handheld. This game only has value as a pack-in with other Game & Watch games. It's like, oh sick, GWG 3 has egg and greenhouse? Flagman is there too, I guess. Might play that a couple of times. I don't recommend giving anyone money just to play this, as its value is purely historical. If Nintendo made a big anthology of all their games and didn't include Flagman, I'd be upset, but I'd get over it pretty quickly. But they should include it just for the sake of completion. Also, please make a Game & Watch Gallery 5 or Mega Edition with remakes for all of them, even if you don't feel like making modern versions. I need to be able to make a child go into full cardiac arrest when I tell them this was gaming 50 years ago. But don't waste your time with Flagman. You watch the game here, that's the full experience. More history time. Unlike many LCD handhelds, Game & Watch didn't have an on-off switch. Since they were also watches, they couldn't be turned off at the time. If they were, then you wouldn't be able to tell the time anymore, and it would lose track of its time. This was way before smartphones, of course, but most people had watches back then, and it would have looked really weird to go digging around in your pockets just to check the time. Amazing how time can change everything, even the humble watch. So it was kind of weird for these to be timepieces at all, but if you're getting absorbed in the next game like I did, being able to tell time was actually pretty useful. So what did it do when you were done playing? It would simply show a demo of the gameplay, on loop, which is great as a display piece. These things could last for months on their 2 LR43 batteries. But I can imagine it was problematic for businessmen and children alike. You have your Game & Watch out on your desk to keep time, and your boss walks by. The demo is running, and now it looks a whole lot like you just quickly put the game down because you saw your boss coming. It feels weird to not have an on-off switch, but Nintendo never really fully realized the power of an internal battery until they made the one for Legend of Zelda NES cartridges, so you could save your game. Game & Watch Vermin, the next entry in the Silver Series Game & Watch games. Vermin is one of the higher selling GWs, selling more than 1 million units, so people have a bit of a soft spot and nostalgia for this one. This is in spite of it being a Silver Series entry, the original set, and thus being much more rudimentary than many later GW games. In the US, this was localized to The Exterminator, immediately breaking the trend of one-word titles. I love the boxes like Vermin's Cream Box and the one-word titles, honestly. It gives these toys a sort of dystopian vibe, like Simulant Nugs, that vegan chicken nugget company. So making it a 2-word title is a downgrade for me. Seems minor, but it's about the theming. The Exterminator is a fine name, but it's not the one I would have chosen. If you were renaming it to make it more interesting to an American audience, the more sensible name would have been Whack, or Moles. Since this is just a portable whack-a-mole game, I honestly just described the entire game to you. It's whack-a-mole. On the physical game and watch, we have what looks to be the exact same housing and buttons as Ball. Makes sense, as this game also only needed 2 buttons. We have left, right, game A, B, time, and reset. The controls are super simple. Left moves left, right moves right. You'll move the guy holding the hammers. He takes up 3 spaces, left, right, and center. And the center is his body, and he can't hit moles with his body, but the left and right hammers can. So you move the guy left and right trying to hit the moles. The hit is automatic, so you only need to worry about the hammers being above the right holes as the moles breach the surface. Game A is easy mode, and has moles coming from the left 2 holes and the right 2 holes, with the center never being used. For Game B, the middle hole is also used for moles. You lose either game mode after hitting 3 misses. The gameplay is quite fun despite working very similarly to Ball. It's amazing how much of an aesthetic change can just change everything about how the game plays. As time goes on and the game gets faster and faster, you hit this flow state and it feels less like a reaction game and more of a rhythm game. Even though this is effectively the exact same as Ball, the perspective change makes all that difference and makes it much easier to time and predict catches. When playing Ball, I'd frequently have balls seemingly be directly next to each other, ready to fall at the exact same time. In reality, these balls on the inner track were falling faster, but sometimes the outer track might be slightly ahead. It was very easy to miss catches because you could never tell which one was actually first. But you don't have that problem here. I don't think there was ever a situation in which these 2 moles breached at the same time, so it's kind of super fun. This isn't to say it's without challenge. It gets to be very fast, and there's a bit of a quirk with the life system. In most games like this, if you lose a life, the board clears and it starts up again. Not in Vermin, though. After losing a life, it will resume play where it left off, so if you were overwhelmed before the life loss, you're likely to still be overwhelmed when it continues, making it very easy to lose multiple lives back to back. I did have a lot of fun with this one, and I definitely recommend giving it a try. It's not as complex as something like Greenhouse, but its reaction-based gameplay makes it much more exciting than Flagman. Nintendo seems to agree that this is one of the better titles, as it's been remade multiple times. Similar to how Ball got a remake for the Mario 35th Anniversary Game & Watch, Vermin was included in Zelda's 35th Anniversary Game & Watch, which is kind of puzzling. Vermin doesn't make that much sense as a Zelda tie-in. For Mario, you can do just literally anything. Mario does everything. Zelda kinda does one thing. It's especially weird since there was a Zelda Game & Watch game that was a double-screen game, but because it was a double-screen game, it wouldn't have worked. It's still just a weird choice. In this version, you play as Link as he whacks Octoroks. You can of course play this on RetroFab on itch, emulated on MAME with ROMs, or you can play Game & Watch Gallery 2 on Game Boy Color. In GWG 2, it received a remake version where you play as Yoshi trying to protect his eggs, and it only entirely changes the gameplay. This remake is actually pretty great because the way it elevates the gameplay in a variety of ways. They didn't settle on just doing a graphical update. In this version of Vermin, Yoshi has 6 eggs arranged in a circle, and from the outer edge will come Shy Guys, Koopa Paratroopas, and Boos. Shy Guys get to the eggs very fast, Koopas are slow, and Boos only move towards the eggs when you're not looking. Since Yoshi can hit 2 egg spots at once, positioning becomes that much more important. The animation to hit a baddie can take a little while, and moving has an animation too, so it's much more efficient to position Yoshi in a way that allows him to whack 2 guys at once. Get a little double fist action going. Yoshi's body also doesn't take up space in this one, but it can be a
little harder to predict enemy distance and speed in this one. Personally, both are valid ways to play Vermin, but I prefer the original in this case, and that's due to its simplicity. Yoshi's Vermin has way too much going on and can be hectic, and I never really settled into the flow of the game like I did with the classic Vermin. I wouldn't say Yoshi's Vermin is a lesser version, it's more like a secret Game C option, but with much better graphics. I think Vermin works best in its simplest form though, so Vermin Classic is my favorite. The speed in these two just have totally different experiences. Vermin Classic on high speed has a flow. Yoshi's Vermin at high speed is chaotic. The best way to play Vermin is hands down Game & Watch Gallery 2 for GBC. Being a Game Boy Color game makes it very easy to emulate, literally everything can emulate it, and there's a chance it'll come to Switch Online like the third one did. There's no shortage of devices that can handle GBC emulation, but for just 30 to 40 bucks you can get an RG28XX from Anbernic, and it's more than good enough for this. You'll also be able to play GBA, NES, SNES, and PS1. This one is, however, a very simple experience, and might not be worth the work of setting up an emulator or the cost of getting a handheld. If you plan to play any other GW games, you may as well check this one out too. I just don't think you should go seeking this one out specifically. Personally, I'm considering buying a Zelda Game & Watch to get it because I haven't really played any of the classic Zeldas. I haven't played many Zeldas in general.
It's history time, once again. You might look at the Game & Watch and how Nintendo's talked about it and think it was destined to succeed from the very beginning. But in reality, there were a lot of opportunities for this to fail, or just never exist in the first place. Had Gunpei Yokoi not rode the train that day and saw the businessman fiddling with his calculator, had that businessman decided to be more patient, then Mr. Yokoi would have never thought of the toy. But even the pitch to the president of Nintendo at the time, Hiroshi Yamauchi, was a chance meeting. President Yamauchi's chauffeur had called in sick that morning, so Mr. Yokoi offered to take him into work that day. Mr. Yokoi took this chance to pitch the Game & Watch to Mr. Yamauchi. It just so happened that Mr. Yokoi wasn't just driving Mr. Yamauchi to work, but was taking him to a business meeting with Sharp's CEO. There, Mr. Yamauchi and Sharp's CEO discussed the idea, and not even a whole week later, Mr. Yokoi got to pitch his calculator toy to Sharp, a calculator company. Sharp at this time was in a war with their competitor Casio, the watch people, and this led to both sides having a massive surplus of calculator parts. If any time was the right time for the Game & Watch, it was now. Sharp's CEO really liked the idea, but instead of taking the project for themselves, they handed it over to Nintendo's second research and development team, who was working on the Color TV game. It was basically an Atari-like home console that had built-in controllers. Research and Development 2 turned down the idea. They thought it wasn't possible to make the game calculator-sized, but Mr. Yokoi and his assistant knew it was possible. So they continued to work on the project and make a concept. The first mock-up of the game was done by cutting out shapes and shining a light from behind them like shadow puppets. Mr. Okada bought a computer, taught himself to program, and went to work designing the electronics. Once they showed Sharp the first concept, they turned down the project. They too thought it wouldn't be possible to scale down to the size of a calculator, but the two were so adamant about the concept working, so they left the prototype with Sharp and told them to just try it out. After this, Sharp was convinced that it was possible and set out to make the display immediately. There was so many opportunities for the Game & Watch to just never hit the market. It was so easy for the entire trajectory of Nintendo as a company to veer off course that day, but everything lined up just right, and with a little help from Gunpei Yokoi and Satoru Okada's perseverance, they made it work. If you think you can't make a game, keep in mind this story and how Satoru Okada taught himself programming in a day and age where YouTube tutorials weren't a thing. You have much more advantages now than these guys had. Even Mr. Yokoi wasn't always the ace game designer he, was known for. He started out his career as a janitor, and now his influence has left a mark on gaming decades after his death. Stop giving up before you even started. If they gave up, we wouldn't have the Game Boy, the Game & Watch, the DS, or the 3DS. Game & Watch Fire. Despite being a game about red-hot flames and saving people, this Game & Watch is themed with blue accents. Sure, there's blue fire, but when I think of hot, I think of reds and oranges. The system designed for fire matches ball, since this was also a simple 2-button game. So we had the usual buttons of left, right, game A, B, time, and reset. In the US, this game was localized as Fireman. Like Vermin being called the Exterminator, this broke Nintendo's single-word name scheme and localized it to a much longer name. Rather than the simple fire, we have Fireman, and I guess there's two of them, so Fireman, because I guess no one at Timeout Games knew that the plural for man is men. I'm not even from this planet, and I know that. Anyway, the gameplay for this one is incredibly simple, but it's also one of my favorites. You play 2 firemen and you move left and right trying to catch people who are jumping out of a burning building. They jump out of the burning building, tumble down, then you have to move to bounce them back up before they become a stain on the pavement. You keep bouncing them to the right until they land safely back into the ambulance. The challenge of this game comes from the same challenge as in Ball or Vermin. As the speed picks up, it gets harder to get to the falling people in time, but like Ball, the faster it goes, the closer together the 2 falling objects can get to each other. This makes it much harder to predict who will land first. Game A starts slower and takes a little bit to pick up speed, about a minute or so. As it goes on, the challenge increases by having you juggle more people at once. And Game B, the game starts faster, picks up speed, has you juggling multiple people, and all of that pretty early on. But the most annoying part of B is that there's a second lower balcony. When a guy jumps from there, he falls fast, like near instantly. And to make it worse, he can be indecisive about when he wants to jump. The ones on the top balcony tend to get out immediately, but the second balcony one will watch for upwards of several seconds. So you have to multitask with juggling your current people and being ready to zip over to the second balcony in an instant. Honestly, it's kinda super frustrating. I much prefer Game A. This is one of the more popular Game & Watch toys, having a remake in both Game & Watch Gallery 1 and 4, and a re-release with the widescreen Game & Watch series. You can, of course, play these with MAME emulation, GWG 1 on Game Boy, GWG 4 on Game Boy Advance, and through RetroFab if you just want to check out a full 3D version of it. I've linked RetroFab in the description because this might be the closest you get to playing the real thing. The 3D views of the box and game are from RetroFab. The best part is that these can be played in your browser with your keyboard, controllers, or by mouse click. RetroFab is great. It's like a museum of LCD games. In GWG 1 for the Game Boy Original, you have a reproduction of the original LCD game and a remake with Mario characters. Mario and Luigi replace the firemen, and Toads, Yoshi's, DK Jr., and Eggs fly out of the castle as you try to bounce them over to Peach's stagecoach. Each character that pops out has its own speed and fall style. Toads fly high and slow, DK Jr. bounces low, and Yoshi is in the middle. With the eggs, you have to bounce them to reveal the character inside, which is Bob-Ombs. Don't bounce them over to the carriage. Instead, let them hit the ground. If you fail to bounce one of them, they hit the ground and Mario and Luigi run off and hide so no one accuses them of murder. Game A and B don't have any differences besides B starting harder. In GWG 4 for the Game Boy Advance, we have basically the same remakes, except for some key differences that affect the gameplay. In the original reproduction, we can see the silhouette of where the jumpers will be. This makes it easier to find out the trajectory of the jumpers, as well as makes it easier to figure out which jumpers are falling faster than the others. This greatly improves the feel of the game when compared to something like Ball. Since the Game Boy Advance was a 3:2 aspect ratio, it was a lot closer to the original Game & Watch series' screen ratio, which was 4:3. This means that the games didn't have to be squished as much and didn't have to have small borders. This makes the original an improved, yet authentic experience to the original, but it's still easier. In Game & Watch, if you're fast enough, you can time it so that you can hit 2 falling objects back to back, even if you're not in the correct fall order. This time frame is extended on GWG 4, even more so when you get to the remake version. In the modern remake version, characters don't fall in these set tiles. I mentioned this before. This makes it much easier to tell which character is falling first, since they have to animate more frames. But it's also more generous with the window time between being in a bounce spot and hitting the ground. Even though graphically this GBA version is very close to the GB remake, it's even more easy than GWG 1. So the characters having different behaviors are there to make it harder. And interestingly, technically 2 characters can be falling at the same time, as GBA sprites can overlap each other. These quirks of the modern software make Fire an incredibly easy game. Even the originals, which I've stated before, tend to be harder because they're not 60 FPS. But GWG 4, even the original version, is much easier than the prior iterations of Fire. So, which version is the best? I would say if you want an easier experience, GWG 4 on GBA. If you want a more authentic experience, I'd say the original, RetroFab, or GWG 1. Graphically though, I think GWG 1 is probably the best. Even though it's GB and it's lacking on color, the sprites are better looking than GWG 4. The sprites on GWG 4 kinda hit an uncanny valley for me. Like, they were trying to be more realistic but weren't quite there. It's not a huge problem with Fire on GWG 4, but GWG 4 in general has an uncanny art style to me. Regardless of what method you use to play all of them, they can be very easily emulated these days. An RG Nano can handle GB emulation and earlier no problem, and it's the size of a wristwatch. So pretty much anything can emulate GWG 1 or GWG 4. Getting an original isn't too bad. Many of the widescreen era models are still available for around $70 to $80, which is expensive, but reasonably so. These came out at
around $53 in now money. I think this one is definitely worth playing, especially if you get it in one of the Game & Watch Gallery games, but I don't think you should buy an original unless you want it for display value. Not many of these games are worth buying an original for, since the Gallery games did such a good job preserving them, and in some cases, making them even better. I'd shoot for GWG 4 if the graphics don't bother you, as you're getting a lot of good GW games in one, like Donkey Kong, Fire, Mario Bros, Chef, Octopus, Rain Shower. GWG 1 only has Fire, Manhole, Octopus, and Oil Panic, which are all still good, but it's less. GWG 4 has much more, and if you want it physical, it's probably easier to find a copy of GWG 4 than GWG 1. The Silver Series is capped off with Judge, a multiplayer versus game which goes on to inspire the versus machines that we'll see 4 years after the Silver Series. Game & Watch Judge. Interestingly, Game & Watch Judge came in 2 different colors, a green version and a purple version. The green version has a bug with how score is kept, and the purple version fixes that. I'll explain that when I get into gameplay. But despite these 2 versions having a huge difference that affects the playability, both color versions have the same model numbers. So the only way to be able to distinguish the non-working one versus the working one is the purple color. Another interesting quirk is, thus far, all of the Japanese Game & Watches have used English to refer to the functions, including on the device itself. That's because in Japan, the use of English to refer to games and computers made them sound more computery and cool. It also makes things sound more modern. Judge appears to be the first to incorporate Japanese on the devices. The Game & Watch logo and game name are still in English, but the buttons hit and dodge are in hiragana and kanji. The top button says tataku, which means hit. Now, all the pictures I found of this one are small, and I can't read the second button all that well, but it looks like nigeru, which means to run away, or in this case, dodge. So that makes sense, that's probably what it is. We also have Game A, Game B, with Japanese below those that say one hito, and the kanji next to it I don't know, but one hito and two hito mean one person and two person, so I'm guessing it has something to do with the amount of players. But that's because the game has a versus game that you can play against another person. Time and reset continue to be in English. So the way this game works is there are 2 judges, you on the left and your opponent on the right. Above your head, on the sign, a number will show, then you have to press hit if your number is equal to or greater than your opponent. If you land a hit and you were supposed to, you'll get points. If you dodge and you were supposed to, you'll get 2 points. Game A is you versus a computer, and Game B is 2 human players. You'll both hold the device, with player 1 holding the left half and player 2 holding the right half. Now, the scoring issue that green has is that the player who dodges would only gain 1 point instead of 2, and the other player would receive the 2 points. This means that in the green version, players are being punished for being good at the game. This is a pretty bad bug that makes it kind of unplayable. Good thing that they fixed it, but regardless, the game sold poorly. Less than 250,000 units were sold. It's probably because this game isn't as self-explanatory when shown to people. When you show someone ball, they easily understand that you juggle. In Vermin, you obviously whack moles. Fire, you save people. And Flagman, well, I don't really think Flagman is self-explanatory either, but you just slap memory game on the box and people will get it. I tested this by asking someone if they could explain to me how these games worked by just looking at the system. So, how do you think this game is played?
I think you push the button left and right and you catch the balls using A, I think.
Yeah, so, yeah, the game is about you catching the balls. You got that. How do you think you play this one?
You press the number of flag that he's holding up.
Yeah, that's one of the game modes. That's close enough. How do you think you play this one?
Go left and right and whack moles that are coming.
Yep, you got it. How do you think you play this one?
You move left and right and bounce the children falling out of the burning building onto the ambulance.
Yep, you got it. And how do you play this one? If it helps, these say hit and dodge on both sides.
At all? I don't know what.
So, you can't figure out how you play this?
No. What the fuck?
Just give me any idea that you think it could be.
Whack each other?
Kind of, that's part of it.
And whoever hit together the most win?
No. Okay, I'm gonna tell you how it works. If your number is higher, you press hit. If your number is lower, you press dodge.
Oh.
Would you figure that out from looking at the box?
Absolutely not, no.
Okay, now what if I told you that the box does not tell you how to play that on either side of the box? Would you want to buy this game?
No. Mostly because it looks a little racist.
because they're all black. That's just the limitations of the calculator thing. Okay, would you have wanted to play this one?
No. Yeah, I love hitting moles on the head with hammers. No, I would not.
Okay, so you just wouldn't want to play Game & Watch games in general, but
no, these look awful.
My point still stands. You can't identify how to play Judge by just looking at it, and that's why it sold poorly. See what I mean? The average person isn't going to be able to tell how to play Judge based on the box. Smith even figured out Flagman, even though that one is a little harder to guess too. So if Nintendo didn't put how to play these on the box, how would you ever know to play this and whether you wanted to buy it? Of course it sold poorly. As for localization, I don't see any mention online of it being picked up by Migo/Timeout Games, which also probably impacted its sales. Retrofab, which is pretty good about showing alternate countries' boxes, doesn't show the American box here, so I'm just assuming it didn't come to the US. Gameplay-wise, this is not a fun game. It kinda sucks. Playing against the AI is hard because it's much faster than you. You'd have to play it for quite a while to get used to it. It's like a worse version of rock, paper, scissors, like they took Jonkin and added more steps to it. The only way to play this is with another human, and good luck getting them to try it. I imagine that experience going very much like when you try to get your friend to play your favorite fighting game with you, but you know all the tricks already and it's their first time. No one is coming out of this game without some bruises and hurt feelings. As for releases, out of the 4 Game & Watch galleries, it's only in the 3rd one as an unlockable for 20 stars. Pretty easy to get, and something cool about it is that you can link it up to another Game Boy and play against a friend in it. But you can't play it local on the same device, despite having enough buttons to do so. In GWG 3, it's just a reproduction, but there isn't anything they could do with this to make it a good remake. So I'm more happy that it's at least somewhat preserved. If you're hurting enough to play it, you can play GWG 3 through emulation or Switch Online, DSiWare, MAME, and Retrofab. The best version to play is the original or the Retrofab version. Unfortunately, because GWG 3 doesn't have local multiplayer on it, it can't be the best version. So the Game Boy reproduction just makes it the worst version of it because it's lacking features over the original. The original didn't need a link cable to play Versus, but on the Game Boy Color, I have to have 2 copies, 2 Game Boys, and a link cable. Come on, that sucks. In my opinion, this game isn't interesting enough to bother seeking it out. My Switch Online ran out, and I didn't bother renewing it immediately just so that I could play it. I did a couple days later to play Lion, but anyway. So as you can see, I've been playing it on Retrofab. Even if they were to re-release this, like they did with Ball, I'd first ask, why would you re-release that instead of one of the good ones? Then proceed to buy it anyway so I could say I own it. Then grimace at it every time I walk past in my home as it collects dust and I feel shame for having bought it, but you know, I can't keep myself from buying it because like, it's not like they release a new Game & Watch every day. Anyway, you're not missing out. And that brings us to the end of the Silver Series. A wonderful series full of oddities and innovation. I had fun trying these out, and I'd really like to see Nintendo re-release a Game & Watch that had all of these on it. It'd be fine if the reproduction wasn't an LCD one. I would like it if they remade all of these on LCDs, but for them all to be on one device, they can't be LCD because of, you know, character limits and stuff like that. It would look pretty terrible if they tried. They probably couldn't even put more than one on there because of the LCD limitations. So I would be happy if they just did a screened version that's like the Mario one, but with all of the Game & Watch games on it. Maybe that'll happen in 5 years for the 50th anniversary, who knows? Maybe we'll get another 35th anniversary edition next year for Metroid. Who knows? The world is full of surprises and good games can come from anywhere. Even a calculator. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked this because... I hope you liked those because I'm continuing with the Gold series soon, so make sure to sub for that. Subbing and liking helps support these videos, and if you're for some reason not into these ones specifically, then you're at least going to want to be here for when I get to the interesting ones, the ones that were the inspiration for the DS. The vertical and horizontal multi-screen games. Bye!